Hi, and welcome to Lisa's Stamp Studio. Today's project is actually a technique called tarnished foil. We're going to use a foil sheet and we're going to put layers of embossing powder over it to give it an old patina look. I've got numerous samples to share with you today, but here is just one of them. You're going to use an embossing folder and a layering technique, and then of course just add an embellishment of your choice. I'm going to give you lots of tips along the way. If you're here visiting from YouTube, you'll be able to find the link to my blog post where you'll be able to see the pictures, the cutting dimensions, and the supplies for today's project over on my blog. Just click right down below. It'll make it easy for you to navigate. While you're there, make sure you check on my online classes tab because I've got lots of fun ways for you to stamp with me from home, including studio stamps in the mail. Let's head over to the stamp table and let's get started on today's project. Here's a close-up of the card I showed you in the preview, but you know what? I thought it would be fun for us to use a different stamp set for this focal point so you could see some new product from the Occasions catalog. I'm using copper foil sheet for this card. Again, you're going to find the cutting dimensions on my blog. I want to tell you that if you use gold or silver foil instead of the copper, this technique works just as well, but then change out the embossing powders to coordinate. We'll use gold and silver embossing powder with the copper. So if you'll use silver foil, you'll use gold and copper embossing powders. You'll see as we get started. The first thing we're going to need to do is create some texture on the foil, and I'm going to be using an embossing folder. I'll be using the Layered Leaves embossing folder, so I'm going to go ahead and stick my foil right inside of there, and then we're going to bring in the Big Shot. I have my Big Shot platform here. Now, since this embossing folder is one of the dynamic folders, you can see how thick it is. You will not need a clear mat on the bottom. So you're just going to put the folder in the cardstock, in this case the foil next, and then a clear mat over the top. And then you're just going to crank that through. These deep impression folders are absolutely beautiful. Now, this technique works well with a regular embossing folder too. You'll need to have your heat tool nearby and have that ready. Next step is basic black archival ink. Now you're going to want to use archival ink because you want to make sure that it's going to dry on the foil. If you own Black StazOn, that will work as well. So I'm going to go ahead and open that. And I'm going to turn this to make it easy for my hand. And I'm going to start off the paper and I'm going to pull the pad across the paper. So make sure your work surface is protected. So you can see it's going to leave some black on there. And then I'm going to turn. I'm going to anchor this here. And then I'm going to do the same thing and pull here. If you want more black, you can just go back over it. It's entirely up to you. Now, archival ink as a whole is very slow to dry, so you're going to need to help speed up the process, and that's where I'm going to use my heat tool. I like Speed 2 for this because I find the foil is very resistant, and it's going to help make it go a little bit faster. Once the gun gets hot, it's going to happen very, very quickly. Once the gun is hot, it'll allow you to make multiple cards at a time, making it much easier. So I'm just going to kind of go over that. My gun is good and warm now. That'll help set my ink. I'm going to set that aside. Here in my tray, you're going to see that I have readied 2 coffee filters with embossing powder. I have gold on one side, and then I have a silver here. I'm just going to get this ready to make it easy for me. I like to use a coffee filter so I can catch the excess powder and it allows me to pour it right back inside the bottle. So set that up here just off camera. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to apply Versamark ink to this area so that it'll create a sticky surface for the powder to stick. Now, it doesn't matter if you use gold first or silver first. That's entirely up to you. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to scrape. And I'm not looking to scrape all over. I may have put a little bit too much there, but I'm going to show you what happens if you have it in an area you don't want it. So I'm starting with my gold, and I'm going to sprinkle everywhere on that paper. Now you can see that I've got a lot of gold here. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to take my finger, and I'm just really just rubbing it off. The messier this is, the better it's going to look. Now, if you don't like dirty fingers, this is where gloves come in. All right, so I'm going to take that, push that off to the side. I have a small rag here just off camera so I can wipe off my finger. And then we're going to heat set this powder, which is going to emboss it. Now remember, the foil is going to conduct the heat really well. So you're going to see that this is going to start to turn to a really fun foil speckled finish. And that's because we've roughed up the powder, so it's not going to stay smooth. Work in one small area at a time so that you make sure you don't miss anything, because if you miss it and you don't heat set the powder, what's going to happen is it's going to brush right off when we go to do the next layer. That looks good. Now I'm going to go back to my Versamark and I'm just going to kind of fill in some areas, and I'm even going to go over some of the gold areas. And now I'm going to my embossing powder, and this time I'm going to use the silver. And I'm going to pour generously over the whole piece of paper. This is why we've got the coffee filter here, so nothing will get wasted. That'll go back in the bottle. I'm going to give that a tap. And again, I can see I've got some areas that are kind of a little bit too thick, and I don't want that hard line. So I'm going to kind of just rub this with my finger just to get some areas a little uneven. That's what I'm looking for. I'm going to set that back off here, wiping my finger on that rag. I've got my heat tool again, and now we're going to heat set. Again, same thing. Start working in a small area. So now you can see we've got quite a mixture. You cannot do this technique wrong. You can't. So that's what's so fun about it. Now, if you decide you want more gold in one area, go back over it. More silver, go back over it. You're going to need to let this cool. And you can see from the heat that the paper does both. So don't be afraid to just work with it to get a little bit straighter. The one thing about foil is it's quite pliable. Now, if you're anything like me, you're going to have a gritty surface here from all the embossing powders. So I find a Swiffer is my best friend. And I want to do this before I do the next step because I don't want this powder to be picked up on my ink pad. So I'm just going to go over it with a portion of a Swiffer and pick up those particles. It does a really good job of this. We're going to go back to the basic black ink pad. Remember how we did in the beginning and we scraped it? Well, we're going to do that again to go over these colors. So I'm just going to pull, and this is where that real tarnished and patinaed look comes in. And if you want more black, you just go back over it, and you can go in any which direction. And to help speed up the drying process, yep, we're going back to the heat gun. The great thing now is the gun is nice and warm. This will go really, really quickly. You don't want to overheat set this because you don't want to mar the embossing that's there. So you can actually kind of create a bubble and it'll start to smell like it's burning. You'll know. So I'm just going to go back over this and just to heat set that ink just a little bit. And now I'm going to set this aside while we work on the rest of our card. I've got my card base here. It's basic black, and I'm going to fold that in half. And I'm a big fan of my bone folder for that nice crisp edge. And that is where our tarnished foil is going to go. You can see I left a wide margin. Because of all the heat embossing and because of the texturizing, I really prefer to use tear and tape for this. Very easy to use. I'm just going to go ahead and place it near the edge. Simply put my fingernail where I want it to stop and then just rip. It's really easy to use. There is a paper backing, and we're going to peel that off in just a minute to reveal the other sticky side. Important that you take your finger and you burnish that paper backing into the cardstock. I'm going to use my paper piercing tool to help me get that off. So I'm going to lift that and then pull off that paper. It's a lot easier for me than trying to get in there with my fingernails. This now is going to get mounted on the base of our card. I want to make sure I have that fold on the right side. Boy, I've done that. And then line that up. And then I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to rub from the back just in case I have black ink on me. And then just secure that onto the base of the card. Now let's do the decorating. I've cut a small piece of basic black cardstock here. And now I'm going to do a little bit of embossing for the greeting. I'm going to prepare the surface for the embossing, so I'm using my embossing buddy. This is an anti-static powder bag. It's going to tell the embossing powder not to stick where there is an ink, and that's going to help avoid the little bit of flex that you get when you stamp and emboss your words or your images. I chose to use the words "Hold On to Hope," and that's from the brand new occasion stamp set called Hold On to Hope. Isn't this beautiful? And the best part is there are coordinating framelits to go with it. We're going to use one that's missing from here today. I'm going to use my Versamark pad as my ink. I'm going to ink that up. And I'm going to stamp that to the far left side. You're going to want to get the ink off your stamp right away. I've got my scrub right off camera. And I'm going to choose to use the gold embossing powder for my words. So I'm going back over that same coffee filter we used previously. And I'm going to give that a little tap to get that excess off. And so now we have our words. So let's get out the gun. It's nice and warm. And then we're going to go over this. Remember, the gun is hot, so keep your fingers away from it. Working on one small section at a time until that powder turns like a foily finish. This is going to go across here on the bottom of my card. So let me grab my snail adhesive, or you can use tear and tape again if you'd like, but I found the snail adhesive works well for this portion of my card. So I'm using it generously, though, you can see, because I want to make sure that it doesn't lift. And then I'm going to mount that here near the bottom of my card, lining up my edges the best that I can. And I'm going to press and rub from the back. All right, so now that's secured. One of the dies in that framelit set is this. Isn't this, this cross is just gorgeous, isn't it, with the filigrees? So I'm going to go ahead and grab a separate piece of basic black cardstock. I've got my Big Shot platform again, and this time I'm putting on my thin die adapter. That just raises the depth of my Big Shot to use with those thinlits. You can use the magnetic platform with the precision base plate if you'd like, or without it. That's entirely up to you. Clear mat on the bottom to protect it. And then I've got my cardstock, and I've got my cross. And then one more clear mat over the top to protect the die, and then I'm going to crank that through. It's very common to hear lots of popping and cracking on Big Shots when you have these detailed dies. I just got lucky today, didn't I? I'm going to flip this over, and I'm going to make sure that it's actually die cut all the way through, because if it's not, you're going to want to pass it back the other way. Now is the time to do it if it doesn't look cut. So let me give you an example. I'm going to lay this right back here on top of the machine. Do you see it? I'm going to leave that paper right where it's at. I'm going to cover it back up. I'm going to make sure that I go back again. If it's not die cut, do it while the paper's still embedded inside the die. That's just a great tip for you. Every Big Shot is different, so the rollers are going to act differently with each die cutting machine. I'm going to give this a little bit of a poke. Just kind of release it from here. And there is my die, and you can see that it is cut. So all I have to do is give this some wiggles, and those pieces are all going to come out. We're back here to the base of the card, and now here's where I'm going to put my cross. Now let's talk about how to adhere this. You can take tiny glue dots and roll them up, but I found that to be way too much trouble. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use my silicone craft sheet and my liquid glue. And I've mounted a sponge. I actually put a binder clip on it to help keep my fingers clean. I keep this in an airtight Tupperware container so that I can reuse it so that the glue doesn't dry out and actually disintegrate the sponge. But I can actually sponge it right on the back of this, which is going to make it easy for us to use. So I'm going to go ahead and put that here. So I'm going to squirt a little bit. You can either put it here or right on your sponge. I'm going to put a little bit on my sponge. Kind of just move it around so I've got some area covered. Leaving it face down on my silicone mat because I don't want glue on the front, okay? And just placing it every which way. It doesn't have to cover the entire thing. It's just enough to tack it down. This glue is very strong. And then I'm going to tap it in place, flip, and I'm going to rub from the back. I like to do that to make sure that I don't rip anything. Now, you may think, well, that really doesn't stand out so much. Let's play up the center a little bit by adding an accessory. So I'm going to use the gold faceted gems and my paper piercing tool because I already have a glue dot on the back. I'm actually going to leave that right in the center. This brushed gold is really beautiful on top of this foil. So there's our finished card, but I've got other samples to show you. This one, same embossing folder. This leaf comes from the Flourish Thinlits, and you can see I added some copper twine here. This one uses the Dragonfly Thinlits with the Garden Trellis embossing folder. Let me give you a little tip about this. You can see that the vellum is actually just tacked down with the glue dot right behind here where it's not going to show. Make sure you use your Archival Ink or your StazOn to stamp on the vellum so that it dries. And then last but not least, I use the Bold Butterfly Thinlits for this, as well as that beautiful butterfly embossing folder. And you can see I added some threads here as well behind there and a gold faceted gem in the center. I would love to know which one of these is your favorite, so leave me a comment below. I am so glad that you joined me today, everyone. I look forward to seeing you next time. Remember to head over to my blog for these pictures and cutting dimensions and supplies. Have a great day, everybody.